Les rendez-vous de l'infra, le podcast d'Infravenir qui parle des infrastructures à travers des tables rondes et des interviews exclusives.
Mobilité,
énergie,
défis climatiques,
infrastructure sociale.
Toutes vos questions trouveront des réponses. Bonne écoute.
I see there's already 40 participants in place. Normally, we would have a registration of about 120 people based on the last 2 weeks registration. But in any case, we can just let people start coming in. And I see there are several participants joining us from Italy. So for everyone's information, we hosted our first Afterwork in Milan last summer, and today's event is a continuation of our efforts to grow the Milan and the international community of Infravenir. So for everyone who wants to get involved in our efforts, of course, feel free to reach out to us after this webinar. So I guess at this point, it's already midday, and I think we can start. First of all, thank you everyone for joining the call, and especially this Infra Insights on MACSE. I am Hannah Cocos, your moderator, and I am joined by esteemed on-the-ground experts, Davide, Alessandro, and Filippo, for this very timely and exciting topic in the battery sector. So before we start, I would just like to inform you that the Q&A chat box, which is just at the top of your MS Teams, will be open 10 minutes before the Q&A starts, so towards the end. So keep your questions to yourselves until then. So without further ado, I think it makes sense now to let the speakers present themselves. Let's start with Davide, Alessandro, and then Filippo. Guys, the floor is yours.
So first of all, good morning, everyone. Like 2 words, literally. I'm Davide Petraroli. I'm a director at Shure, an investment banking boutique with offices in Milan and Paris. And I'm pleased to be here together with colleagues and friends, Filippo and Alessandro.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Alessandro Gemmo. I'm a managing associate and the coordinator of the Energy Infrastructure Group in Linklaters Milan. And I'm really happy to discuss this hot topic with our colleagues.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Davide. Thank you, Alessandro. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Filippo Chiesa. I'm Chief Investment Officer at Galileo. Just a few words. Galileo is a renewable energy development and investment platform, developing projects across 10 European countries with a multi-technology pipeline of wind, solar, and BESS. Very much look forward to the discussion as well. Since our foundation in 2020, we have taken the view that effective renewable energy development entailed being able to satisfy demand where it is and when it's needed, and therefore storage is absolutely a key element of our strategy to create renewable energy generation portfolios that are balanced and that are more in sync with demand. And I think, as we will be able to discuss today, the MACSE case in Italy can be also the occasion to touch upon themes that are relevant for storage, renewables, and for the energy transition in Europe more broadly. So look forward to the discussion.
Great. Well, thank you very much, 3 of you. This is going to be an intense next 60 minutes for everyone, so hold on tight. And before we start, maybe it makes sense to look at what MACSE is, especially for those who are new to the topic. Basically, it's the Electricity Storage Capacity Procurement Mechanism, which is a regulated process in Italy establishing fixed tariffs for 15 years to support the development of the battery sector in the country. So Terna held the first auction at end of September, which covered southern Italy and the islands, and the total capacity was 10 gigawatts, was oversubscribed by 4 times, and was procured at a very competitive bid, smashing expectations at 13K megawatt hour year, which was 65% below the auction ceiling. So Enel won 67% of the capacity, followed by ACL at 21%, then Solar challenged 4%, NZ Energy each procuring 8%. And the sentiment has been mixed across the market, some celebrating it as the success of competition, some claiming that the results were heavily skewed. Now, just to go into this discussion, Filippo, could you give us an idea on who do you think is the real winner of the MACSE tender?
Thank you, Hannah. I will try. And I think there are a few perspectives that one can take when trying to answer your question. And I will share some elements around three of these perspectives. So one perspective, which is also the simplest one, is to look at the awarded capacity by company, which is what you just did, Hannah. And if you take this perspective, you see that 67% of the awards went to Enel, Italy's largest utility. Therefore, Enel can be seen as a clear winner, with the other 6 awardees sharing in on this win. If you take this perspective, then the follow-on question can be also, why was Enel so successful, right? What are the competitive advantages that made this win possible by Enel? And the explanation, I think, is multifold, and it probably relates to engineering and procurement capabilities, a competitive cost of capital, but also optimization of DevEx and interconnection capex on brownfield sites of hosting existing plants. And finally, also potentially other optimization measures, and in particular, reutilization rather than dismantling of existing infrastructure. And I think this was particularly true for the large project that Enel has next to its largest coal plant in Brindisi in the south of Italy. So this is one perspective. A second perspective is, well, when you look at the competitive levels of the award, you could actually say that it is the off-taker, Terna, Italy's TSO, who should be considered as the real winner in this round. The weighted average award price, you said it, Hannah, 13K per megawatt hour of battery capacity per year, is basically 1/3 of the opening regulated bid level. So in sum, you could say Terna, Italy's TSO, had identified 50 gigawatt hours of additional new storage capacity being needed for Italy through 2030. And in the first auction alone, they were able to fill 1/5 of this need at very competitive levels. As a result, if you take this perspective, you could say that the MACSE awards can be seen as a positive outcome for Italy's energy consumers and even taxpayers, since the controlling shareholder of Terna is the Italian state. However, there is also a counter thesis to this perspective, which is, okay, award levels were very competitive, but if nearly 70% of a capacity award goes to the largest national utility, will this not pose the risk of discouraging competition in the future and in future auctions? So if private companies end up being discouraged in participating in future auctions, you could produce a dominant position in the future without the counterbalance of competition, therefore resulting eventually in lack of efficiency and higher costs in the future. So if this counter thesis, taking this perspective, has some merits, then regulators could think of measures to reassure private players and ensure competition is put to work in the future, right? So this would be the second perspective. Look at Terna, look at the competitive levels at which they were able to introduce flexibility in the market, but also look at the risks deriving from concentration of awards. But I think there is also a third perspective which we should all consider in trying to answer your question, Hannah, on who the real winner is. And I think we could also say that the real winner is the technology itself, because I think the outcomes of the first MACSE auction are a proof that the cost learning curve of the technology of BESS may be actually much steeper than we expected, and may resemble what we have seen in solar PV across the years already. Especially in the last few months before the MACSE bid, many operators have seen very significant reductions in quotes coming from equipment providers. And I think it is this trend that created also the expectation that this will continue, and therefore led many players to bid on the expectation of further reductions in the next 12 to 24 months. So in this sense, right, taking this third perspective, I think we could say that also the other participants in the end are winners, because, well, not only they have created the competition and they've allowed the auction to clear at very competitive levels, but they've also contributed to mobilizing a supply chain that is becoming ever more efficient, which eventually is what unlocks the potential that storage has in eventually addressing one of the key challenges of the energy transition, which is delivering affordable domestic clean energy when it's needed, at the time of day when it's needed.
Of course. Well, thank you very much for the three perspectives. Indeed, the results are not as clear-cut, and it's not as always as simple as one thinks it is. So it's very, let's say, positive to know that it's not just Enel who won here, but it's actually the whole system and more actors that could benefit out of it. Now, winning is just the beginning for these actors. Now, Alessandro, my question to you is, what are exactly the commitments that comes with winning this tender? Is it realistic to meet this?
Yeah, very interesting question that I suppose that a lot of developers is now asking in particular in light of the outcome of the auction. So basically we have the commitments are split in two phases. Obviously, the first one concern the planning phase, and the other one concern the delivery phase. So the first one basically concern the necessity to fulfill to certain administrative obligation, like obviously the execution of the contract with Terna and the relevant implementing agreement, which basically regulates the performance of the contract. Another important element is the submission to Terna of the post-auction guarantees. That is another important element because it amounts to the 15% of the total contract value. And the payment of the contribution to the guarantee fund, that is basically a general instrument proposed by Terna, which in some way regulates the fulfillment and cover the fulfillment of the obligation of all of the participants in the MACSE auction, the winning bidders. Following this first step, there is a reporting obligation and a half-yearly reporting obligation that basically has to be met by the 30 June and by the 31 December, on the basis of which the developer has to represent to Terna the status of development and the expected date of commissioning of the battery storage system. Then we have the reach of at the end of the development phase, that is basically the reach of the commissioning date that has to be fulfilled by the 1st January of 2028. And this is obviously the more tricky point because the completion of the development is attested by the completion of the testing period and by the availability of the plant to the ancillary market. That is obviously another pillar important for the functioning of the MACSE system. Basically, this is in a very short way, not the description of the main commitments, but obviously the key one is the possibility to reach the commissioning date by the 1st January 2028. In case of lack of meeting this deadline, there is a decalage system and a system of penalties that apply. That obviously is a quite strictly regulated by the Terna MACSE regulation. And basically the key point here is to understand if on the basis of the outcome of the auction, the investment basically has to be fulfilled by the developer, and obviously it depends from the business plan that has been prepared before the participation to the MACSE.
Okay, so in terms of So in terms of analysis, so that's what we have now. We have the results, we have the commitments which have been delivered by Filippo and Alessandro. Now, let's move forward to the impact to the stakeholders, because concretely speaking, Davide, could you give us an idea of what kind of profitability and bankability does the 13K thousand per megawatt hour year imply to the different stakeholders and the winners, of course?
Sure. So I think that the 13K has to be put in context also with respect to the people that got awarded the tariff. Of course, bearing in mind that the 13K is the weighted average tariff per megawatt hour per year, which takes into account also more aggressive bid and less aggressive bid, even though the overall bids was let's say, can be seen as an aggressive bid compared to where people were landing and what was, let's say, the general market feeling and expectations before the tender. So very briefly, I think that it's interesting and important to see who are the main players by, let's say, awarded capacity that won the MACSE, that got awarded the tariff. So I mean, you have Enel and Eni. I mean, I don't need probably to comment and make any description on those. I mean, quite relatively global players, and probably don't really have, let's say, a kind of a cost of equity return on a single asset basis, but probably global portfolio and strategies. So also an listed company, so probably the logic are completely different. And on Enel, I will keep it aside because I think that the industrial logic of Enel is completely different in the context of the overall MACSE. Then you have ACL, a developer together with BWS, okay, part of the BW group, a diversified industrial group active in maritime, active in oil and gas and sustainable technologies. So probably if you take the awarded capacity of these out of the overall activity of BWS, let's say together with the partner ACL, is super small. Then you have Wisol Investment, which, let's say, recently made a joint venture with Predica. Predica is, let's say, the insurance arm of the group Crédit Agricole. So, I mean, I think it's quite clear that the return expectations are completely different, probably compared to other, let's say, value-add infra funds or more typical infra funds. And then you have, for example, the Energy and Greenvolt Group. Both of them, I would say, very international. Greenvolt Group is backed by KKR, active in across 18 countries. Z Energy backed by several funds, including Amundi, Demeter, Marguerite, and they are active mostly across France, Italy, and Germany. The reason why I'm saying this is because at the end of the day, if you look at the players that got the MACSE, there are players that are not necessarily active only in the Italian market. So, and I think their bid has to be seen in the context of also an offtake strategy diversification across countries, in the sense that clearly MACSE is very interesting because you have those industrial players that got awarded, let's say, contracted revenues 15 years, quite happy about this, and they can take more merchant exposure on other countries like Germany, for example. So their return has to be seen in the context of a blended portfolio strategy at platform level, right? If you take the standalone return, probably on a levered basis, this can be 5-6%, something like that, okay? Levered. What does that mean? At the end of the day, it also means nothing. Because as Filippo was saying before, the cost of technology is clearly one of the main items of it, okay? And you have, let's say, the single cost of the equipment, and I've seen, let's say, players with the cost of equipment ranging from 50-55K per megawatt hour to 80K per megawatt hour. Who's right or wrong? Let's say both, in the sense that you have to take a view also in the future. But the real point around this was also with respect to bankability, and because the return, to conclude, is also a matter of, let's say, the overall strategy of the player, right? Like a platform has a platform strategy, a terminal value, probably if you have a fund inside it. So maybe you can have a standalone return, but also, let's say, a kind of a blended return together with the strategy. Clearly, banks were very happy about the MACSE, right? Banks were very happy, 15 years, contracted revenues. So they saw what in Italy it was probably the Conto Energia at the time of the photovoltaic plants in 2012, 13, 14, 15. So very happy. The counterparty is basically Terna. So super low risk, basically no risk, and basically easy money and also easy return from the banks, right? And also possibility to allocate a big amount of money with a, let's say, really low risk. And we were seeing 15, 7 years sizing tenors, contracted DSCRs around, I don't know, 1.20, 25, 1.30. Okay, the typical contracted DSCR that you see in the Italian market. And theoretically, you were lending at around 80, 85 debt to equity. Probably with the awarded tariff, you are more in the range of 70, 75. That depends also, let's say, on the cost of capex, of course. The real question mark is clearly, are banks going to play a role in the MACSE? Yes. Are banks going to play a role with Enel and Eni? Well, it's different. So, you know, that their funding strategy is completely different. Maybe it's energy, green vault. Yes, you know. So the real point is what happens to bankability. I think that the real point around bankability is what happens after MACSE, in the sense that probably MACSE is a strategy, but a lot of people may be asking, is this the only way? So everyone that did not get awarded a MACSE is already thinking about either the next MACSE or either already talking also with lenders, for example, of a mix of tolling agreement plus capacity market. So lenders are already studying this, okay? And so in terms of bankability, I can tell you that you have MACSE on one hand, and on the other hand are banks that are looking forward already, okay, to play with different structures. And I think that in the context of these, you will have also incumbent players like private debt funds or more, let's say, kind of credit funds that could try to tailor really structures together with their client in order also to accommodate more merchant or blended structures. So clearly MACSE was contributing for 90%, 85% at least of contracted revenues. Probably afterwards you will have more a mix of 50-50. So for 50-50, let's say contracted and merchant, are banks going to be still compatible with those structures, and not necessarily in terms of pricing, but also in terms of debt quantum? Or can private debt funds or credit players make tailor-made structures on the basis of the needs of a client, standalone, whole financing, portfolio financing across geographies, cross-collateralization of cash flows? So I think this is the interesting question that we need to ask ourselves, but also together with all the players across Europe. And you need to differentiate European strategy versus standalone strategy on the Italian market with respect to the sector.
Definitely agree with you, Davide. And you already touched on this point. So there's more or less a consensus that 13K is very competitive and probably not worth it for some particular actors who are not looking at it on a portfolio level. So in that case, Filippo, can you give us a bit of a flavor of what kind of business models are likely to emerge following the MACSE tender?
Sure, happy to do that. Alternative routes to market are already emerging to sustain battery revenues, to make them more predictable and more bankable, connecting to what Davide was just saying now. So on the one side, you have Italy as an energy system, as a market that has a growing need for flexibility, and much larger than the capacity awarded with MACSE, of course, and this may intensify in the next few years with more renewables penetrating the system. On the other side, you have a growing supply of projects, which was increasing very much also in the months ahead of MACSE. By the way, this shows that there is also another winner that you could think of, which is the permitting authorities, that when they want, they can really ramp up, right, their efforts and process permit applications very fast. So there is growing demand for flexibility, there is growing supply. So I think that it's natural to think that there will be different ways for these two to match. Currently, what we see as the prevailing alternative to MACSE being pursued in the market is a combination of a capacity market participation with either merchant trading or the so-called tolling agreements, properly or improperly. So contractual structures where you get the battery developer operator gets a fixed price, or sometimes there are variations with caps and floors or swaps, right? So ways to create predictability over revenues, letting then the toller or the off-taker to manage the position in the market. So we already see some of these being signed. There are already a few examples in Italy, and these types of contracts could allow higher returns for developers that were not possible, at least in the first MACSE auction. On the other hand, they could also provide the opportunity for off-takers to capitalize on future price volatility. So the evolution of these contractual structures can play a key role in managing the risks and providing robust and bankable products. So I think such arrangements can provide strong bankability solutions, at the same time ensuring that there is somewhat of a healthy competition among various routes to market as well, to the overall benefit of Italy's energy system. So you have Terna that already announced, right, the capacity market auction and the second market auction for 2026. You have all these dynamics at play in the private offtake market. So I think we are up for interesting times in Italy, but I think that something comparable will also be observable in many other European markets.
Thank you very much, Filippo. Indeed, it's good to know that it all doesn't end in MACSE and that we are already seeing actors mobilizing on the ground regarding the different alternative routes. Just a reminder to everyone, I just opened the Q&A session, so you can now put in your questions to any of the speakers throughout the session. You can find the Q&A box, chat box from the top part of your MS Teams, and then you can just insert your questions there, okay? So now we are going to move on to the third part of this webinar regarding expectations. So we talked about the results, we talked about the immediate implications to the stakeholders. Now let's move on to the future. So Davide, what is your expectation on the impact of the first MACSE to the upcoming two tenders of the MACSE, because as we know, there are still two more to come, and as well as the other tenders such as the capacity market and the like? What do you think?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to have a crystal ball, but unfortunately I haven't found one in my life yet. So second point is that it's really interesting to see the outcome of the MACSE, and despite my wife not being very happy that I travel between Paris and Milano almost on a weekly basis, but I have the luck of having, let's say, kind of perspective, local perspective and international perspective, in the sense that it was fun because after the MACSE, everyone in Italy was relatively upset, while outside of Italy, talking to international players in Paris, everyone was telling me it was very good, the MACSE outcome. So, and already you can get really, let's say, the really different perspective of people, which really depends on, let's say, also their strategy and views. And this is really important because for me, this is also the main driver for the following MACSE tenders, in the sense that I've seen that probably the outcome of the first tender has discouraged a bit probably players with a strong local view or with a strong knowledge of the Italian market, in the sense that clearly this MACSE tender was focused on the, let's say, south and center south areas. So then I will leave Alessandro to comment, but probably the next ones will be more so, let's say, touching other regions like the north. But you know, let's say, I think that some players are really asking themselves if the next MACSE tenders will be managed like the first one. So there will be not also cap on awarded capacity and concentration of capacity. Does it make sense for us also to place a bid So guarantees, becoming stressed, running business model, talking to the banks, or does it make sense to start working on alternative models and routes? Okay, so, and I think that, let's say, really, we don't have an answer to this. I can tell you, and my feeling also talking to various clients and players is that probably, again, that really depends on the, let's say, your business plan at a platform level. So probably on a standalone basis, that may discourage a lot of people. If, let's say, you look at a standalone return of your project, well, unless your expectations are the one, let's say, arising from the MACSE, from the first MACSE. Otherwise, I think that, I think that for the next MACSE tenders, that would be probably an opportunities for international platform with diversified strategies. So you have other countries like Germany, which is a really hot market in BESS and is a full merchant market, basically. And a lot of people are taking a position on the German market yet. You have seen an intense M&A activity. You have seen also local banks that are taking also merchant views, okay? Clearly, German banks, I would say, that have been very supportive always for German market, even in merchant scenarios. Probably it's not really the same in Italy, even with Italian banks, but also, let's say, international project finance banks with an Italian position. So, and I think that those international platforms really, they may keep playing a role in MACSE to diversify their offtake strategy and have a contracted revenues, let's say, portion, which is their backbone and a kind of break even probably to be compensated. Let's say they could allow to compensate for more fancy or more merchant strategies. And I think that the reality is that after MACSE, this is a market for tollers, for tolling agreements, So, and I think that already now some people are talking to let's say, various tollers about potential tolling agreements. The reality is that similar to what happens with PPA, when you want to fund a renewable project, you will not get a 15 years tolling agreement. Well, very unlikely, let's say, mostly, let's say 7-10 years. So, and the range of price, I don't expect the range of price of those tolling agreements, and I can tell you by the preliminary discussion I have him deviate so much also from the outcome of the MACSE. So at the end of the day, you can say, do I want to finance my project also without the MACSE? Yes, you can do it. What is really the standard on return that I can get on these? I think that will not just depend on the financing structure. I think that will not just depend on the next MACSE, but I think it will depend really on the industrial view that you're going to take also on the technology. And I think that at the end of the day, and I've seen a client that wrote in a statement that what they think that is going to make a difference for them is they may take also full merchant views on the batteries, because they want to, let's say, play a little bit with different IRRs, energy arbitrage opportunities, but what it makes sense to them, even if you are financial players, is to have a disciplined asset selection approach and probably also a disciplined energy management strategy. Because to conclude, the complexity around batteries and the reason why everyone was happy about the MACSE is because MACSE is like renting your apartment. You give the keys to somebody else and you get the rent. If you have to manage the batteries on your own, it becomes a more industrial job. And is everyone capable of playing a pure industrial role and be structured internally to really manage the battery and have an energy management team or energy management strategy that can allow to, let's say, negotiate tollings, participate to capacity market, So this is the real question mark. And I think that BESS is much more industrial than what we think. It's not like, I don't want to say easy like photovoltaic, but I think that everyone understands what I mean. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for that comprehensive insight regarding the expectations following the first MACSE. Now, thinking larger and broadly into the horizon. So, Alessandro, how do you think will this particular tender impact the battery sector development in the whole of Europe? Of course, when MACSE came out, everyone was looking at Italy. So it's high time to know what could be the expectations or the future development for the rest of the continent.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. It was funny discussing the outcome of the MACSE auction with UK and Germany colleagues that obviously had a very different experience around the battery storage market, and obviously it's very difficult to predict what would be the impact of the MACSE, but for sure it represent a sort of benchmark, a test that has been strictly monitored by the other TSO in other European countries, because probably the approach that the different governments have taken about battery storage depends from how they perceived their role in the energy market. Because, for example, in Germany, the approach, likewise the UK, has been to consider the best like a totally private asset class that has been to be fully and privately developed. But conversely, the Italian approach is quite different, because the fact to structure a public auction to grant a sort of stability in the cash flow deriving from the development of this kind of asset in some way manifested the vision that the Italian government has about the MACSE and or more in general the TSO, that is a structural element that has to be implemented into the national Italian grid. And this is an important element to take into account, because probably other countries that has the similar issues about saturation of the grids can see an interesting element of the outcome of the auction, because I am thinking about, for example, Spain and France. It's something that probably they will try to mirror a system similar to the MACSE in order to complete and to cover the infrastructural leakage that still is present, in the grid, in the national grids. And another important element that we can probably see, in the next future is a growing attention by the European Union institution, because the development of this kind of asset strictly connected to the grid in some way represent and can trigger some concerns about cybersecurity, for example, and more in general, the necessity to regulate also from an unbundling perspective, the entity which can or cannot develop this kind of asset. So it's not something that is under discussion now, but probably will be under discussion when further European countries will implement a similar system.
Okay, thank you very much, Alessandro. So I'm seeing that we are actually we're running just correctly on time with a bit more buffer. So what we can do is dedicate the rest of the time for the Q&A that has started to come online in our Q&A chat. And so Filippo, can I let you start with the Q&A?
Sure, happy to do that. So
Great.
I'll address two questions raised by Guillaume Girard first. First question is, do awarded projects tend to be fully contracted or only bid for partial capacity contracting? So it is the former. They tend to be fully contracted. So if you discard the marginal projects where they were awarded only a portion of the capacity because only a portion was left, if you discard those, all those who bid and were fully successful, they went for on average 95% of their capacity as contracted capacity. So they left out a very minor component of their project capacity. The second question you raised, do you see merchant revenue assumptions as a key success factor? Yes, so not so much in the 15 years of the MACSE period, because you could still achieve extra revenue. You can still achieve extra revenues during the MACSE period, but you have to give back to Terna 80% of what you generate by using the battery as well. Let's say another ancillary markets in another market areas. But yes, for the 5 years after that, people would look at 20-year business plans. And so the view that you would take on those 5 years post-MACSE had a very important impact on your valuation and therefore on your bidding strategy. Then I think there was a question from Marie Como. The question was, is there a scenario that this MACSE tender actually discourages actors to participate in other tenders in Italy and then increase the risk that a few dominant players control the battery market? Yes, there is that risk. I think I started commenting on that when we were speaking about who the real winners are. There is definitely a risk that people are scared off from participating in future auctions due to a perceived dominant position. Counter arguments could be that perhaps the first auction washed out or washed away the very competitive projects where there were very special cases that made it possible for bids that were so low. That may not be the case in future auctions, but it is a risk. Again, you could, thinking about economic theory, you could say, well, one way would be to introduce caps per single player or maximum awards per single player or maximum capacity per single project to, let's say, mitigate concentration risk. And thinking economically, you would say, is the cost of introducing those, let's say, regulations in the free market competition, is the cost of those caps lower than the cost of allowing for a dominant position to emerge and therefore not creating efficient results, right? So you could think about this in terms of, if you take the perspective of the regulator, but so it is a risk. I think private companies will think differently about it, taking a view about how many more projects there are that could be so competitive. And on the other side, you could think also in terms of regulation of what could be thought of at least.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Filippo. I don't know, Alessandro, Davide, perhaps you want to take yes, Alessandro.
Yes, if I may, just to provide my view regarding a question concerning the expected M&A market evolution around the BESS project. For sure, another winner of the MACSE auction are the advisors, basically, because obviously created a lot of opportunity to interact with a lot of different players around the development of the BESS project. And probably we'll see an interesting evolution in the secondary market around the project, because obviously, as already discussed, the feelings are really different about the outcome, and for sure there are different players that will probably no longer want to continue the development of the relevant projects. And also this element, I suppose, that will attract further investment by investors that will prefer to opt for certainty in the cash flow rather than the amount, obviously, of revenue from the development of the project. So probably this is another interesting sector that will attract more investment in the next future. Probably we'll have to see the outcome of the next auction, because probably this one has been in some way impacted by the amount of awarded capacity that had been taken by Enel, for sure. But it was also interesting to see the outcome in the north area, because obviously the first auction was focused on the south area. Exactly. The north area has different elements. In particular, the use of tolling agreement could be something more interesting also in the modeling of the business plan, because we know that two tolling agreements have been already entered for BESS project in the north of Italy, and it's something that is quite interesting in view of the next auction. So let's see. I don't know, Davide, if you want to add something on this.
No, very, very quickly to integrate. I think that the main question mark is, compared to a few months ago, is who is going to sell and who is going to buy. And I think that depends also a lot on the structures. So I think that you will have mostly two markets. One is let's say, projects under development. One will be projects, let's say, under construction or constructed, with eventually also an associated offtake strategy and already financed. I think that will drive a lot the behaviors also of sellers and buyers. What I mean with that, development is always, let's say, a tricky part, because you can have one developer or you can have three developers: the original developer, the second co-developer, the third co-developer, which every time there's a passage increase the cost of, let's say, the authorization. So the real point for me around this is how much is worth an authorization for a best project after the MACSE. Okay, so and probably we still don't have a view in the market yet. Why so? Because at the end of the day, this is I think it's kind of easy to say, but BESS is cheaper compared to, let's say, the development of PV, and certainly compared to the development of wind. Okay, so it's not a matter of cost, the development, but it's more, I think, now a matter of, in the M&A market, can you give me something that is ready to plug and play an EBITDA, or do I have to bear some risk? And if I have to bear some risk, does it make sense that I develop on my own? Or does it make sense that I do some joint venture with an industrial player and I'm a pure financial player? Does it make sense that I have a pure, let's say, platform views across geographies? So I think that the reality is that you will need to see what is going to happen with MACSE 2. You will need to see what is going to happen with the link agreement. And I think that you have two completely different markets. Probably, let's say, incumbent people from also outside of Italy may play a kind of hybrid role in the purchasing of projects, a mix between development and more advanced projects. And I think that the complexity of people that may be willing to sell is also, if I enter into a tolling, or if I bid for MACSE, and if I put in place a financing structure, is my project then a sellable project in the market? So, and I think that we will need to understand really the behaviors of the people in the market in the upcoming months. So to reply, there's not already an answer to this. I think that the reality is there will certainly be people today, if I would have to express my view, that would accept a discount for a plug and play project rather than a discount for a project under development. Because today you don't want to incur the risk of overpaying a project under development, and because that purchase price depends strongly on the offtake strategy. So either there will be, let's say, kind of joint agreement whereby we decide together what to do, and ultimately I have, let's say, already fixed valuation whereby I will buy the project when the offtake is being defined, and I will become the 100% owner, and you will accompany me with, let's say, the local development activity. So it makes sense that you have a local player, international players partnering together, but it is more into a kind of joint venture structure in the development of projects, probably, and studying together the market. So this is, I think, our view. It will be interesting. And this M&A view will be strongly intertwined with the financing strategies that we'll see in the market.
Absolutely.
Anna, can I maybe take one more question?
Of course, absolutely.
I'll have to disconnect in a couple of minutes, and happy to re-engage with any participants also offline. But I think a follow-on question from Marie was, what impacts from MACSE adoption can we observe in other countries at the moment? I think Alessandro alluded to that already. I think there are two things. The first one is that international off-takers, traders, now know that there are projects that are ready in Italy, and they're coming and they're activating those alternative routes to market, and they are focusing on Italy, and they can also use that experience that they are doing in Italy in other countries. But then the second aspect is on the regulatory front. I would expect other countries to look at the lessons learned from the first MACSE auction, both good and bad, of course, to fine-tune their own programs and their own policies to ensure that we have the flexibility and the storage that we need in the energy systems.
Okay,
I
great.
will let you discuss the rest.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Filippo, for your participation. I think we have a bit more time and there's a few more questions. I don't know, Davide, Alessandro, if you want to take some of those. There was a question about, as an infra debt fund, what is the best way to position here if you want to participate in batteries in Italy? And I think this is in the context of the M&A discussion earlier. So, of course, the equity
Yeah.
players are going to be active, but how about the debt players?
I can take this. It's not an easy answer, to be honest. But the reality is, I think that today, as an infra debt fund, you have to take more a principal view compared to a pure lender view, in the sense that there's a strong intrinsic value in the batteries, okay, once those are built, and in the context also of the needs for this technology in Italy. So I don't want to become very technical, but you can also take a loan to value approach, first of all, on the batteries, okay, which is not necessarily what banks may take. And the principal view that you really have to take, probably compared to pure banks, but simply because I'm saying nothing weird. The internal processes and the internal, let's say, lending policies between banks and private debt funds are most of the times different. And this is why they play a different role in the market, and each one of them play a role. And probably I think that infra debt funds, sometimes they can be more flexible than lenders, simply because this is their role. Being more flexible, I think that you have to take really a principal view in making tailor-made strategies. And the way I think that you can position here is really to study the market as you were investing your as an equity player in the market with respect to the merchant position. Because I can tell you that banks are already interested, let's say, in funding a project even without a MACSE, but they are already putting some constraint. I want the tolling plus capacity market because otherwise you cannot get to 50-60% contracted revenues. So, first of all, the next capacity market, we don't know anything yet. So tolling is a market that is arising now, even if, if you got certain tariff under MACSE, I don't expect tollers to play with numbers that will deviate entirely from the MACSE, right? Because otherwise that would not really make sense. So I really think that here you need to take some kind of principal views with respect also to merchant strategies, and that there's a strong also point with respect to legal tenor and sizing tenor, in the sense that if people are going to bid to construct the batteries now, you need to understand how much batteries are you going to construct and who is your client. Because if they have a portfolio, you can take a portfolio view, you can fund the construction of those batteries, and after 2-3 years, well, the market may be different. The structure could be completely different. It will be necessarily more mature. So you may not be there anymore. Or the structure, let's say that the banks will have changed also their approach. So I think that private debt fund will have to play a role as tailors of financing structure, but also with a kind of, I don't want to say bridge view, but they can accompany equity players as pure partners in the evolution of the market, to allow them eventually to be a little bit more merchant, waiting for what is going to happen also in the market in the upcoming years. Because certainly, if the market is of interest, and this is of interest because in Italy we need more installable capacity of renewables, we need more BESS, because let's say we are behind our targets, so we need more. And clearly when you need more and you are behind your targets, let's say institutions are forced also to contribute to this. So this is really my view.
Okay, thank you very much, Davide. And I guess just to complement, I have a question for Alessandro regarding the legal aspect. Are you seeing on your side more and more appetite for this type of tailored solutions for an industry as nascent as batteries in Italy? Tell me what you're seeing.
Yes, it's an interesting question. Now, obviously, the focus was in basically set up a pipeline to participate to the MACSE. The point here now is to some way to implement all these projects. So in terms of what we can see from a development perspective, probably the next auction or will implement some corrective measures that try to address also the elements, the construction elements, for example, all the components of the batteries and the relevant providers, because as you know, there are also ongoing discussion about the possibility to implement it, to introduce a dedicated premium for batteries that are at least assembled in Europe. So there are several aspects that has to be taken into account. For sure, the development is something that will happen. We don't know who will be, the players. It will be the one that that attended to the auctions, or it will be different players, but this project will be implemented. And the point here is to analyze and to understand the best strategy to reduce the capex, because as said, considering the high level of competitiveness in the bids, find a way to reduce the capex is the most important things now.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you very much to everyone. Obviously, the speakers, we've learned a lot from you. So thank you very much for your time. The engagement of the participants are also highly appreciated. Just a reminder for everyone who would be interested to participate or even engage in these kinds of activities of Infravenir, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Whether that's in Milan, Paris, London, or any other offices, of course, you could definitely do something and take part of our association and become active, obviously. Well, and for that, that said, I give you back the rest of your lunchtime. I really hope you learned a lot from this Infra Insights, and we are looking forward to see more of these conversations with you, and see you soon. Ciao, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye. Ciao, ciao.
Et voilà, c'est déjà la fin de ce podcast. Merci de votre écoute. Si vous avez aimé, n'hésitez pas à mettre 5 étoiles et le partager autour de vous. Vous pouvez vous renseigner sur les prochains événements d'Infravenir et adhérer à notre association sur infravenir.com. Retrouvez-nous aussi sur notre page LinkedIn Infravenir. À bientôt.